you talked a little bit about this in your introduction, but when we talk about trauma and healing trauma, what is both of your take on collective trauma and specifically as it relates to this past year? You know, we had a year of reckoning. We've had a year of really digging deeply into a lot of our histories, specifically in the Western Hemisphere, but all over the world. And so, as people who are in the margins, what is your take on trauma and healing trauma from a decolonized lens?
Such a large question, but it's an important one. I think this past year brought it to the surface. I think it wasn't something that we could shy away from anymore. I don't think it's something that we could just sweep under the rug and just try and keep it moving. I think with the world coming to a reckoning, like you said, where there were so many things that put it in our face that we had to have the conversation about it, I think it brought it to folks their conscious awareness, whereas some of this stuff was in the subconscious and it was just a way of operating and it was just a way that we did things. But now that it's in our face, whether it was the health disparities with COVID-19, which has to do with social determinants of health and people in the margins in their communities, and we had to look at some of these things with Black Lives Matter. We had the revolution that was in the midst, and we're still in the midst of. Again, I think it put it in the forefront. And so now the question is, what do we do with it? What do we do as a system, as a collective? What do we do with it? We can tell people they need to go and seek healing and find this and do that. But as a system, systems really, because there are so many other systems at play here, what do we do what do we do now? And I think with these conversations and folks, advocating and doing the work both individually, but also on the macro level, I think these conversations are very important because now we can actually shift paradigms. Because now we can actually have the conversation where it's important to really look at intergenerational trauma. Some of this stuff didn't belong to us. Some of this stuff, the traumas and the woes of life didn't start with us, but yet we still move through life as if we're holding on to it and carrying it. I think if we really talk about that, there's a release there that it doesn't belong to me. And so being that it doesn't belong to me, I can operate and move in a different way, in a different fashion, holding on to the resilience of my ancestors, holding on to the healing of my ancestors, but realizing that I don't have to answer the same way they did. I don't have to do it the same way they did. So.
I like that answer. It goes into a lot of what I'm about to share, but I was going to say that I think, within the past year, it is a reflecting pool of what we've already been exposed to, being in minority populations. So it's really an embodiment of genetic memory and, self-actualization, right? Because our ancestors and the people that have been here before us were already demarginalized in so many ways. And I think within the past year during the pandemic, it elevated it to be in your face because it was televised, it was on social media. So people could no longer shy away from it and say like, no, this is not an issue, this is not a problem. Because particularly what happened with George Floyd, and a lot of the Indigenous communities, minority communities came about, and we came together as one, and we supported one another, but it also elevated. During that time when that happened, I noticed that it elevated the level of anxiety within so many people. And so that, further embodied that people were very, very disconnected with being mindful, very disconnected with, the communities that they come from. And I think in a big way, it elevated questioning what type of direction we were going as a society. So I would say that, you know, within the last year, the biggest thing that I've seen is the distortion of balance in a person and a distortion of balance within the environment in terms of how we collectively treat each other as human beings and how we have forgotten the elements of this earth and how, you know, it started to shift to where it's the greed was shown and the capitalism that's taking place within the culture itself right now. Those things were elevated. There was no longer where, as Hakim said, it was shoved under the rug and, you know, we're not paying attention to this anymore. It was very much in your face. And I think, you know, everybody seen it through television, social media, and, you know, we felt it within our own homes. So I seen it as, you know, we were for as far as Indigenous and minority communities, I think it also gave us a chance to also bring to light our own stories and our own struggles, because I think a person of non-color sometimes doesn't understand what a person of color does go through when it comes to something such as health, equitable healthcare. You know, those are things, and then, you know, all the disconnection that comes along with these different things, and it brought to light some of the insecurities for some of the systems that we operate within.
Wow, yes. Uplifting both of those answers. And thank you both for putting that into the space. And I just have to, you know, CC and agree with you both on that, especially the parts about this collective trauma and collective healing idea. You know, those of us who have been in the margins, we have had to understand trauma individually, but collectively within our own groups. I think what the last year did was expand that to collective trauma of the world. And I think that that was a new way of all of us, of humanity, seeing suffering for the first time. One of the things that we talk about, you know, in mindfulness is the fact that one of the things that's real for everyone is suffering, right? Just as joy is as well. Like those are two emotions that everyone feels. And I think we were able to expand that in a different way because of technology and because of these reckonings, because COVID-19 exposed a lot of things that were undercover and that were embedded in the consciousness of all of us. And so a lot of my work this past year has been having us sit down and talk about these, you know, having contentious conversations about this collective trauma that we have and the anxieties that came from that, right? The fact that we are all on edge all the time right now, but how that's important to the work moving forward. So, you know, I just really want to thank you both for putting that in the space. And it's really great because it comes into our next question. You both mentioned systems. And, you know, I wanted to take a moment to really talk about systems and get your take on how these systems related to health were built and who they were built for. And then kind of in that same mindset, what ways we can move forward either within or without these systems.
Okay, I'll go. Systems. So there, much of it has to do with barriers. And when we're talking about was it built for us, people of color, those in the marginalized communities, was it built for us? My question and thought is no, but who was it built for? Who was it built for, and in what mindset? I can't say that it was built for people who are not of color, but I can say the system that it was, the container that it was built in, demonized or made Black and brown people, Indigenous folks look bad. The treatment wasn't there. There's a lot of misdiagnosing that still goes on for marginalized folks. And it's because the manifestation of emotions and the expression of most emotions are different from other people. And so when we're looking at a very cookie cutter book that gives a diagnosis, doesn't include everyone in their self-expression. It doesn't. And so then that's when I have to say, is it built for other people, people of color, Black and Brown, Indigenous folks? Like, is it really, do we consider all the different elements of a human being in this one book or in this text that we're using? I can honestly say no. And that's a part of decolonizing, because decolonizing gives the space and gives you permission to interrogate these things. That's the part. We must interrogate some of these things and some of these systems to really question, is this truth? Is this accurate? Is this right? And it's in that space that I can actually see the person that I'm working with. And it's just a question, right? It's just a question. And I need to ask that question because it allows that space for me to actually see and work with the person from their perspective. We talk about person-centered care, we talk about strength-based model, we talk about empowerment, but none of that is really laced within the system. That's that part. And so I would say the system often serves as a barrier from adequate care, actually doing the work. And so yeah, I think it serves as a barrier.
I love that. I just wanted to chime in 1 second and say, thinking about the fact that critical analysis of the system is actually creating better care for folks who reside in the margins. Like just considering asking those questions as a practitioner allows you to open your mindset enough to say, maybe I'm not giving the best care I should, and maybe I should be opening this up to a more centered person perspective. I think that's key.
Because it removes the thought that something is wrong with this individual.
Yes.
Like the system tells us that something is wrong with you, and really there's nothing wrong with me. It's a trauma response, or I'm responding out of what I know and what it removes that stigma around something being wrong with me. So especially when it comes to mental health, we have all these other systems telling something's wrong with me because of my skin color. Why do I go to a space, or why am I in a space where I need to heal? That someone has to tell me, before you heal, you have to know that something's wrong with you.
Thank you. Cheryl?
Felt that. Sorry, I got so excited and so I would say, and kind of piggybacking off of what Hakim had stated, and I mentioned genetic memory earlier, and I think history has shown us time and time again that the systems that we operate within, whether they're educational, healthcare, or even economics, these institutions were not designed to include people of color. That's my stance on that. Is brown people have always been the minority in any of these entities. And so when I was thinking about this the other day, taking into consideration the Constitutional Bill of Rights, when you read that, that hits, because you're thinking to yourself, this wasn't really written for someone who looks like me. This really wasn't written for, and as an adult processing that, but when you hear it from a child, when you hear it from youth, and they say, those words that are written on those documents, I don't feel like they protect me. I don't feel like they cover me if something was to happen. And that was elevated within the last year in the pandemic. It was like wildfire spreading, and people were just running for their lives, and they didn't feel safe. And then all these systems that we were taught that we're here to protect you, enhance you, encourage you, and motivate you, and innovate you, right? And people did not, I seen that within the last, didn't feel it, especially within the healthcare system, I think. And so And I think, like I said, going back to that concept of genetic memory, were these systems designed to be built for us? No, because history tells us we were more in the concept of the mind frame of where we were to be exterminated. The genocide speaks for itself. The different populations that inhabit this country. All the minority populations have different stories in terms of how their people, they were facing when colonization happened. They were facing all the isms from an early get-go. And so, and what it elevates is that, these systems no longer have the concept of holistic balance anymore. It's more based on capitalism. And Hakim alluded to that earlier, as opposed to really taking into consideration what a person's trauma is, that cultural competency to be like, okay, this person endured this type of trauma, but not just this person, the person's mother, father, grandmother, the lineage, what really happened to this person. So there's those types of lenses are not being looked through when they're diagnosing an individual when it comes to mental and behavioral health. So you have, I think, kind of coming back full circle is, looking to how a person's anxiety and depression is elevated in that concept. And then also sitting with somebody, let's be real, sitting with somebody who does not understand, the trauma that was inflicted by this person's heritage, within this person's heritage, their ancestral lineage. So I think taking that into consideration too is, very important because, and I mentioned it earlier, for example, for Indigenous communities, we were removed from a lot of Indigenous children that went through the boarding school era. They were removed from their traditional homelands and they were forced to cut their hair, speak a different language, and they were scowled and abused for knowing what they only know. And so, taking those types of consideration to how am I going to develop this person's treatment plan, I feel like that's not taking place at this time.
Quick story, just to piggyback off of what Cheryl said. I went to South Africa to study social work for a bit. And we were meeting with stakeholders and it was really the question was centered around like HIV care in children who have parents who have passed away from HIV and other things. And I will never forget two things I'll never forget, but one thing that I'll share with you. the public health dean of the School of Pretoria, she said, we didn't have orphans. Orphans wasn't a thing until the Americans came. She said, when a child's parents would pass away, the family, the community would embrace them. We didn't have, so then America came and just built all these orphanages. It was like, that wasn't a thing. And I'll never forget that, because how often do we do that with communities of our own? We go in, set up shop, do things, give a diagnosis, when it's really, that wasn't a thing to begin with. And now we have these terms, now we have these dis-eases, these disconnections from ourselves, and it's unexplainable because it wasn't here to begin with. But now the system has told me that you need to fix this and we need to do something, because from our lens, something's wrong or this is an issue.
Yes, no, and thank you for bringing that up, because I think that's so important to language, like to holistic language around this as well, right? When we're talking about challenging the paradigm that something's wrong with us, it also comes back to the fact that in a lot of ways, when we're talking about decolonizing mental health, a lot of the things that we see as a mental illness or injury was never wrong with us in the first place. These were either seen as gifts, or these were seen as sensitivities, or these were seen as all these things that gave us powers in a lot of ways to be able to connect with our collective folks. Like anxiety was just the fact that you were sensitive to things that other people weren't sensitive to, and that was a good thing. But then the systems came and told us that there was something wrong with us. We needed to take medicine. We needed to do this. But going back to your story, Hakim, I think that's so deep. Like I tell people I was raised in a village, and they're like, "You mean like a farm?" And I'm like, "No, a village of people, right?" Like that's where all of these third culture things come from. Is the people were my village. And so if something ever happened to me, I know that I have all of these different lineages and cultures and folks to hold on to. My family is bigger than just myself and my ancestral lineage. My family is all of these things and all of these people. And if we could create a health system that included that mindset, how much healing will we really be able to offer if we changed the way that we thought about the hurting in the first place, right? Which I think is so deep when thinking about this. Which actually brings us to our final question for the panelists before we open it up to question and answer from the audience. We wanted to make sure, because this is another thing that's very important when we talk about culture, when we talk about decolonization, we talk about, anything that has to do with words like minority, margin, all the languages, is we talk about hurt often, but we don't get the chance to talk about healing and happiness and joy, right? So I wanted to make sure that we brought into the conversation, into the space, a way for us to envision a future for a collective world that had whatever you think it could look like if we were to take a decolonized lens, if we were to take a lens of healing. What would the world look like for us if we didn't come into these systems that we've created for this lens of mental illness, substance abuse, injury, homelessness, all of those things? Actually, I'll start because I'm on a roll. So one of the things I see in terms of the work that I do is talking circles, which I know we have in global Indigenous communities, but in general, like being able to have ways to share our narratives, ways to share our stories is so powerful. Sharing yourself through word is healing, right? And unfortunately, the English language is limited, and so we don't have the opportunity to share a lot of feelings in the ways that other, global Indigenous, and by global Indigenous, I mean the Indigenous of the Americas, the Indigenous of the Africas, the Indigenous of Europe, the Indigenous of Asia, global Indigenous cultures, we used language to be able to share our feelings, our hurts, our healings. So even though English is limited, we can still use the mechanism of talking circles to work towards healing. So instead of punishment, right? I was, I'm a Black kid from the South. I got punished. But what I'm trying to say is my parents made it a point to talk with me about it, made it a point to ask me questions, made it a point to discuss. And being able to use that from a lens of mindfulness, to sit down, to take breaths, and to have discussion and narratives. I've seen a lot of people heal a lot of their generational trauma just from creating that space. So I would see that. I would see more talking circles as a way to heal collective trauma and move into collective.
I would say, in addition to that, just talking about emotions, access to language. I think there's a disconnect somewhere. Not somewhere, I know where it is. There's a disconnect that has created this space from ourselves. And I think accessing it through our emotion or emotional experience is very important, because that's a way of connecting back to ourselves because of our my emotions. And often our emotions are there to tell us something else, right? If we're able to connect that to our spirit, then we can actually get somewhere, if you will, and some healing. But there's something somewhere along the lines, we found out that vulnerability was not the thing to do, and it created this distance. And so with being vulnerable, not only with other people, but with ourselves, and being honest. And I think it's through that practice that we can actually heal. Because I don't necessarily, no, I don't want to say that. I want to practice vulnerability with myself and really get to know myself. And that's through processing emotions, that's identifying emotions, that's allowing myself that I don't need to run away from these emotions, but actually embrace them because they're a part of who I am and my makeup. And it's through that I can actually unlock my own internal healer, because this is me, right? And these are things that have, again, created distance, but my ancestors have been doing this, whether it was through dancing, whether it was through music, whether it was through whatever. And once I get connected to my emotions and I process it, I can allow it to release. I can allow it to move through me because it's not supposed to stay there. It's not supposed to be rooted in my subconscious and suppressed. It's supposed to give me a message and then release.
I swear Hakim opens it up. That's kind of where I was going to go with my answer, actually. I would say, you know, having a voice. I mean, each of us on this panel, I mean, let's be real. We come from very resilient people. So resiliency runs in our blood. It runs through the voices that we shared, whether if it's on this platform or the clients that we're dealing with, you know, on a daily basis. It's not something that we were born and then we had to learn, like reading a book. It was something that we learned from the get-go through that upbringing that we had from our ancestors, whom had ancestors before them that taught them those resiliency skills. So, you know, we should, the way I look at it, we should continue to embrace that. And most of all, you know, exercising our rights, because we're cognitive and we're aware of our rights, as opposed to being silent and being, you know, continue to feel like we're being suppressed. I say exercising our rights and exercising the rights for the, encouraging individuals that don't have a voice and don't feel like they're strong enough to stand up. You know, we're able to uplift those individuals. So being silent no more and banding together, like in this type of platform where we're able to come together and talk about it, and being mindful in the positive energy that surrounds us with the elements of this earth. I think that is also one of the biggest things that I kind of always go back to when I work with the disconnected youth that I do, is telling them, you're never alone. We have Father Sky, Mother Earth here. We have the elements of this world to comfort you. I know your mother and your father are no longer here, but you have these wonderful elements here that are listening to you. Let's restore that balance. Let's start the healing process, you know, continuing to honor, you know, all the teachings that you come with. And I think, you know, being able to use our minds in a clear and cohesive manner to where it affects the change that we envision for it to come, so we can continue to be part of that evolution for our future generations. So one of the things that I was thinking while I was preparing for this is, I was having a discussion with my child and I was telling her, you know, she was like, Mom, you're going to be an ancestor someday. I know you're always saying you want to honor your ancestors, but you're going to be an ancestor someday too. And that hit me hard. I was like, wow, you know, that is true. We are descendants of ancestors, and we have a responsibility to take care of our descendants, the ones that we are going to be the ancestors for.
Holding space for that. Holding space for that, Cheryl. Thank you. Thank you. So I wanted to jump into a couple of questions from the audience. One question we do have in the question and answer, and I do have another from one of the questions during registration previous to getting here. So if anyone else has questions, please feel free to put them in the question and answer box. We'd be happy to answer them in the time we have left. But this question is from Alex, and it says, some migrants experience traumas around not living in a system which is designed for them. Can your work help them to feel more grounded and connected while living in a capitalist and colonial system such as the US? And I guess I want to be clear on this too. We're just talking about migrants. We're talking about migrants from all over the world. So from European nations, from everywhere. Okay, I'll start. Oh, go ahead, Hakim.
No. Go ahead.
I love questions like this, and I'm going to go to my norm because this is why I'm here on the panel, and talk about it from an equitable mindfulness lens, and just say that, you know, many of the ways that we forget that, first of all, this is a lifestyle. We talk about it as a practice, and you know, Cheryl and I talk about this a bit, but the ways that mindfulness has been capitalized upon make it seem like it's some sort of individualistic practice. It's not true. You know, this is a collective and grounded practice. And so one of the ways of trying to feel more grounded and connected while living in a system that wasn't built for you is to use these practices to remember who you are and why you're here, right? You know, I'm living in a different country right now, and I have to remember the same thing: is why am I here? What am I doing? Taking time in silence, taking time to really dig deeply into what I want to do to serve in this space and what I want to bring back when I go, right? Like, all of these are things that help keep me grounded. And the practices of mindfulness help me to feel connected in that way to the global. It's not just me. You know, I'm thinking about myself, I'm thinking about others, I'm thinking about my family, I'm thinking about my community, I'm thinking about the broader humanity, and ways that I can use these practices to sustain this global connection that I have and serve in that way. So, you know, using these practices of mindfulness to connect back into ourselves, and then to expand and to be global.
I think the work that I do, I think creating the space for that authenticity is important. But coupled with that is a social justice informed lens, understanding systems, understanding that some of this impacts how we show up in the world. And so if we can chip away at some of those things in the space that we create together, then your authentic, you get closer and closer to your authentic self and to your core. And then in that space, we get to re-examine or examine some of those core beliefs, because we're conditioned to believe certain things, and we're conditioned to think a certain way, and we're conditioned to have certain paradigms. But if we sit in a space where we are able to see ourselves and be seen, we can then examine those things. And so I believe in the space that I operate and work with is creating that space, but also holding on to that social justice lens that some of this, again, I say it all the time, some of this didn't belong to us, and it doesn't. Some of these woes and some of these traumas and some of these things where we show up in the world impacted and wounded and things, they're not ours. And so creating that space for you to be seen and you to be heard and understood, I think does a world of difference for folks.
Awesome. I would say, you know, I mentioned cultural competency earlier. I think, you know, taking that a step further is, you know, empathy. Empathy goes a long way when working with any population, regarding whether it's a person of physical disability or, you know, a person of color. I think empathy goes a long way, because tapping into the consciousness of change will only occur if we're being mindful to what type of trauma this person inherited before you encountered them. So I think, you know, being able to, you know, wondering where this person came from and kind of really taking that mindful step to be like, okay, how am I going to approach this situation? What words am I going to use? What kind of space am I going to bring this individual into? Taking all the different kinds of considerations to how you're going to tailor that person's treatment plan for, but being really in the moment with that person and being really, showing your humanistic side to that individual, I think really goes a long way. And that's been my experience. We work with homeless and disconnected youth. Sometimes they're refugees. And a lot of times these are poor little souls that, they're here in this country without their mom and their dad, and they're just scared. And they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going to happen to me. I don't know if I'm ever going to see my parents again. I'm really, really afraid. And then they see all the injustices that are happening while they're in the system. And so when they come across to individuals that are empathetic to their situation and understanding and comforting, that goes a long way, because they're already coming to you with so much trauma, but the level of anxiety and depression, their distortion of balance and peace has already been taken from them. So I think being able to come into that space with cultural competency, empathy, and an open mind goes a long way.
Thank you, Cheryl. We have another question from the audience, and I absolutely love this question, and I'm really looking forward to your answers to this. This person said, Rachel Flowers, a Le Aksan scholar, talks about rage and refusal to forgive in her work. The healing and love needs to be turned internally rather than towards people and structures that cause harm. This is fair. Can you speak a bit about how rage and joy and love work together to build different worlds moving forward? And I'm going to start just by saying thank you for this question. And a part of my work is getting people to realize that all of those are emotions, and all of those emotions are fair, and all of them deserve to be felt. And again, there's signals and signs that you are alive and that something is happening inside of you. And so when someone tells you not to be angry, that's another form of oppression. And we should be able to express rage, to feel rage and to have it. We should be also able to express joy and feel joy and love and have that towards others as well. I talk a lot in my work about not spiritually bypassing, which is a lot of what the spiritual mindfulness world has done, which is basically said that we are all one. And so since we are all one, we don't need to talk about all of these marginalizations and injustices that have happened. You cannot move past any of this until you first acknowledge it and recognize it. And pain, hurt, anger is a part of that, right? Being mindful is not saying, I only want to be a part of the rainbows and sunshine. It's being mindful of everything, including all of the things that do not serve us. So it is important in this work, and specifically in equitable mindfulness, that we allow people to be angry, to feel that, and to not have to tell somebody that they feel love or joy in that moment. From that, hopefully, a seed of love and joy grows. But if it doesn't in that moment, then that's okay too. I'm gonna let them water the emotion they have. When the emotions are ready to turn over, they will. So that's my take on that. And I love to open it up and hear Hakim and Cheryl's take as well.
Yeah, really quickly, Jay-Z said it in one of his songs, you cannot heal what you don't reveal. I think anger is one way of allowing yourself to go in to reveal what's going on. Anger is one of those, anger and rage is one of the emotions that we are easily connected to because of society. And so I was trained and taught in substance use that anger is a secondary emotion. There's something that came before the anger. And so if we take some time to really dig into what came before the anger, then I can actually heal what I need to heal. So it's as Tiara said, we can't dismiss it. It's a key. It's a pathway. It's a little light into something else that's going on that I can actually shine on it so I can actually dig a little deeper. Then love and joy can actually come because I'm in the space of release, because I'm sitting with it now. I'm not afraid of it. I'm not suppressing it. I'm not trying to judge it and push it away and saying, I'm not supposed to be angry. I'm not supposed to be this. And I'm not supposed to be that. But if I sit with it and realize I'm angry because I'm hurt, I'm angry because I feel disrespected, I'm angry because insert whatever emotion here, I think it's important and allows us to actually connect to that. Then we can actually move and cross over into the joy and the love. But it doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be crunchy. It doesn't have to be forceful, because all of this is a part of us. It's all a part of who we are. Sometimes it is hard, sometimes it is, but we also have the choice of calling in joy, understanding that there's a larger lesson here. And if I have that lens, then I can actually move with ease. Because it is anger and there's some tough situations, but I can move through it with ease because there's that hope on the other side. My future self is calling me to a higher self and to my best self and to a higher vibration. But I need to go through some things, some of this anger, and sort through some of these things in order to get there.
So I would say that with, the thing about feelings such as anger and pain is and that in that moment when a person is feeling those emotions, you really, it's hard and it's tough, but at the same time, you're also, and I can only speak from my personal experience, but I sit with it. I sit with it and I just marinate the heck out of it. And the reason being is it brings, I have a sense of gratitude in it too, because I sit there and I think creator and the elements of this earth that, I'm so glad that I'm able to feel this emotion right now, as opposed to not feeling any emotions at all. And being able to acknowledge that, I think, is growth in any platform. It's growth for a child, it's growth for a young adult, and it's even growth within our age range, and then also within elderly too as well. There's always coming a time of change, but I think one of the things that I acknowledge when I work with the youth that do often feel this is those feelings are brought along incohesively with their circumstances, meaning it can be a lot of different things within their class system, within their feeling of prejudice, and feelings of disconnection, not just within everybody around them, but maybe because of their sexuality and different types of things like that. So there's all these different mixed emotions that are coming about. But I think, getting a person to understand that, sitting with those emotions and processing and praying and acknowledging, what is happening within you, it also, once the work is done within yourself, it brings an elevated level of love for yourself and it's it turns into a form of self-care, right? Because when a person gets upset and they're like, oh, crying and these tears are coming, and then they get really, really upset, and then that person gets exhausted. It's like with a little baby. When a little baby is crying, they're throwing a tantrum and they're throwing themselves about, and they're so upset with what is happening at that moment. But after, when the baby calms down, they're soothing themselves and they're like, okay, I got it all out of me. Now I'm ready to come back and join you. I feel a lot better. I needed that to happen. Thank you for being patient with me. And now I'm ready to move forward. So I think, reminding individuals, to be mindful, to really to tap into that, because you can use that to your advantage, and tailoring that method of self-care is very, very important into your adult years, is one of the things that we try to educate the disconnected youth with.
Thank you. Thank you both. So we have a couple more questions that I hope we can get through. This next one is specifically about mindfulness. So I'm happy to take this and then also open it up to you both if you have any answers. But This person says that this has been very insightful. When it comes to the term mindfulness, you mentioned that it's often thought as an individualizing term. However, it is not thought of such, it's actually circulated as such, especially within self-help and popular psychology. Yes, this type of mindfulness is persistent and pervasive within various aspects of our lives. How, in your opinion, could we change the current popular connotation of mindfulness? Thank you for this question. And I wanna make sure I'm clear. It is both circulated and thought of as individualistic mindfulness in the Western secular spaces. And that's part of the problem, right? People consider that, and this is why, one of the reasons why, I created this kind of concept of equitable mindfulness, which is just a word. It's just a word that focuses on the fact that mindfulness itself is inherently inclusive and inherently cultural and inherently social. So it is not, it is not meant to be an exclusive term. It's meant to say that these practices have been global, collective, and group oriented since the beginning. But because of the way that they have been translated into Western societies, specifically through colonialistic and capitalistic lenses, they are now seen as individualistic and are now circulated as such through medical journals, popular magazines, and Psychology Today, right? Which can, and this is for capitalistic reasons. This is to gain money. So one of the ways that I see this changing is to remove that sense of it, to bring it back to what its purpose kind of was, which is inclusivity and bringing people together and having an understanding that this is something that we all have access to, that we all can practice, that all of our ancestors have practiced, both spiritually, again, culturally and socially, but just understanding that everybody has a body, everybody has a breath, and this doesn't need to be capitalized upon in order for it to be used. So I think that this was a really fantastic question. And that would be my way of kind of reframing it to make sure that we realize that it itself, or the practices themselves, are inherently inclusive. They're inherently what they are. We have reframed them to be that way in this Western culture. Did either one of you want to chime in on that before we move into the next question? Okay. All right, awesome. So thank you so much. Okay, so the next question says, I'm going to paraphrase this a bit. What are some strategies you might offer to sort collectively holding space for each other and interactions so that we can all develop a means of relating to one another differently? What kind of things do you do for your clients beyond empathy to help them move through internalized colonial resonances and impacts?
Do you mind reading that last line one more time?
Yep, no problem. And actually, I'm going to read the first part because I think it's important. So understanding that we are subject to the conditions of a system we did not design means navigating an environment that's hostile to our existence and relationships we might yearn for and are seeking. So what are some strategies that you might offer to collectively hold space for each other in those instances? And what things do you offer for your clients beyond empathy to help them move through internalized colonial resonances and impacts?
I think the first thing is giving that space for vulnerability, putting it into practice. And I think when people go into a therapy session or a group therapy session, they're not fully aware that they're practicing vulnerability. And so it's really allowing someone to practice it, but then showing that mirror back to them and was like, you just practiced vulnerability. You did it. Because that's where the disconnect is, right? Because there's distance between seeing each other and practicing empathy and connecting with one another, because it's actually through our emotional experiences that we can actually connect with one another. So if I don't have access to my emotions, if I don't have access to my language around emotions and an emotional experience, and I'm trying to suppress them, then I show up in the world a certain way. But if I'm able to practice vulnerability and really get to know myself, then I'm able to practice and connect with someone else. It's through vulnerability. And so it's how do we frame it where vulnerability isn't weak. Vulnerability is actually strong. It's actually a strength of yours, that you can do it on your own, and really showing that those walls prevent people from connecting to me, but also me connecting to other people. Those walls that we built, whether they're through society, whether they're through collective pain, whether they're through defense mechanisms because I was bullied on the playground as a kid, all these things serve as barriers for me connecting to other people. And so if I'm able to, and I say this all the time, how can I help you become the active participant in your own life? Not saying that we need to control everything, but I want to be the active participant because I'm the one that says, let me lower these walls down and actually connect to this person. Let me put these walls up because I can't trust this person. If I'm the active participant, I'm consciously aware and I'm consciously doing it versus it being fear-based. Fear made the decision for me. Shame made the decision for me. But if I'm able to sit with myself and practice vulnerability, I'm able to do that from the seat of an active participant, which is very different from when I get to the question that you're asking.
So just to add on really quickly to kind of what Hakim had mentioned there, I think, what we've found useful with, using traditional and holistic practices is that, bringing it, as opposed to having a discussion, yes, we're sitting here with the client and being in this space, I'm human, you're human, but at the same time, because a lot of times the work that we're doing with the individuals, it's very, very deep and it can be triggering. So what we found to be useful is, as opposed to you talking to me and, me providing feedback, we kind of bring it into a place where we use natural elements. Natural elements meaning a lot of times we'll have a cup of water there. And, through the duration of this discussion, I'm using it right now as we're speaking. I had this here this whole time, and this is something that my dad made. And I've been holding this the entire time that we've been talking. And that's kind of what we encourage the youth to do as well. Sometimes we'll have a rock there, and then we'll have also some sand there, because those are elements of the world, elements of the earth. So we tell the person that's coming in for services sometimes, pick one today and you can hold it for comfort today, because I don't want you to feel that you're pressured to talk to me. You're pressured that we're going to heal you all in this time that we have right now. And if you want to, you don't even have to look at me and talk to me. You can focus all your energy over here. Let it take care of you. Let it do the work with you and for you. Let it carry some of that burden that you're trying to elevate off. And, bring it back here, being mindful in this moment. And you know what the best part is about this? These elements exist outside these four walls. These elements are with you to take home with you when you are at home. Therefore, get into the habit of being mindful to talk to things beyond what your recognition is to the eye right here, having to feel like you have to talk to somebody. Talk to these elements right here. They're here for you. They're here for you any point in time throughout the day. If you feel like you need to talk and vent to somebody, go for a walk. The sky is listening to you. The trees are there for you. This earth that you're walking on, talk to it. Learn to become one with one of these things again. It's kind of how we, provide that instruction to these individuals, because I think a lot of times people come into that space thinking like, heal me, give me the answer of how I deal with all these different demons that are attacking me right now. But at the end, we try to bring it back to, you already have it. You already have it. You just need to take it. You need to recognize it and acknowledge it and bring it into your space.
Yes, I love that so much. You already have it. Absolutely, it's inside of you. And also just one other thing I throw into this, just thinking about, research on stereotype threat, or just in general, is the fact that, telling people the truth actually helps them to get beyond a lot of these issues. And so when you tell girls in STEM the truth about stereotype threat before they go and, take a take a quiz or whatever that has to do with STEM, they usually do well, or if not better than, their counterparts. And it comes down to just being honest with the folks that you're working with. Like, this system wasn't built for you. Let's just be honest about it. And yet you have the skills inside of you to be able to move through this. You don't need to look anywhere else. And I'm here as a tool, just like everything else out here, right? My job is not to heal you. My job is to be a steward with you, to walk with you on this journey to healing, right? That's it. That's my role, right? I just help to plant the seed. You got to water it. You got to make sure the sunlight is there. All of those things are you. And I'm here cheering you along, calling your name on the sidelines. So I think that that's a huge thing about it as well. So a couple more questions. Hopefully we can get through a couple more of these before we close. Hassan says, I'd like to see institutions like post-secondary institutions move in a direction of decolonial care and equity. Is this even possible given the historical harm and trauma they have done on the BIPOC community? And actually, so keep that in your minds. And I'm also going to add this last question as a part of this so that we can think about them in tandem. So the last question talks about mental health and wellness, and the language, using the language of colonizers and Western frameworks because of English. So the fact that we tried not to use that language, right? But we keep using it. We called it old understandings for new beginnings here. And yet we still are calling it decolonization, which is not a word of our original tongues that would be ancestral. So the question basically asks, how do we shift the lens of focus more on these frameworks in ways that define them for what they are rather than what they're not, right? In relation to colonialism, in relation to Westernism. So instead of saying decolonized, it's not a decolonized practice. What is it? Okay. Do you all remember the first one? Both of those together.
I can try to take a stab at this one because this resembles a question that I often get within my own household. I have a very, very inquisitive teenager, and she always says to me, Mom, whenever we talk about Indigenous people, I'm always called on, like I speak for all Indigenous people and all people of color. Especially when we talk about Christopher Columbus, especially when we talk about manifest destiny, all these different types of things that are in these textbooks. So she was saying, what she was alluding to is the instruction, the formal instruction that takes place in these institutions and these systems, right? I think when we will start to see some of the changes is when a lot of those curriculums are updated with the actual truth, which is not always so easy to hear or to teach. Can you imagine a person of, non-minority descent talking about the Trail of Tears, talking about, this is how it impacted the individuals when they went to that encampment. This is the realization of extermination and termination of Indigenous people and Black people, the real concept of slavery and genocide. Those are the things that are not taught in the textbooks. It's hinted on here and there, but the actual realization in terms of why people of Black and brown populations have come to where they are at right now is not being taught in any form of curriculum from the elementary, middle school to high school level. And then even in college, the reshaping and reforming of the concepts that are taking place with the dialogue is barely moving at turtle speed to go into a different change of direction, but we're not there yet. And, you know, I say that oftentimes that, you know, the inflammation, that I don't know if it will happen in my lifetime. I always, you know, that's one of the things that I do teach my children, and I tell them, I'm being real with you. I don't know if it is really something that I'm going to see within my lifetime. I pray for it, I hope for it. But these are the things that you need to be sound-minded and mindful that you can continue to advocate for. Continue to educate these people in your classes. Continue to educate them about the truth, because maybe someday these things, the paradigm around these issues will start to shift and change, and the truth can finally be educated to the population. Because when the truth is finally educated to the population, then it's like, oh, then why were we doing these things this way this whole time? So really that was wrong, right? Oh, wow. Like, okay, let's go, let's be part of this change. And earlier I mentioned, you know, being able to be mindful of how you can be part of the change by having that conscientious approach to being like, how can I be part of that change? Because that sounds exciting. It sounds exciting because it's inclusive to everybody, regardless of the color of their skin.
I love this question. And I got excited, so I had to write some things down because I don't want to miss anything. So I think it's important to, one, know your audience. My grandmother always said that, know your audience. The audience knows their language. So if I go in and talk about healing and wellness and use terms that I more so identify with, they're not going to understand or comprehend that we need to change this system. We need to change this paradigm. And so it's important for me to know my audience and use the language that they understand, and then bring them to a place of uprooting that, changing it, change the narrative. But I have to be aware of their language. I'm a church boy, so I was gonna talk about something, but I won't. I won't do it. You hopefully understand what I'm saying. But it's important to, one, on a larger level, on a macro level, understand that point. On an individual level, it's important for me to give space for people to name their own situations in their own language. I would use the example of my aunt. She would say bad nerves versus saying anxiety. When she says bad nerves, I'm not going to change her language and say, no, what you're talking about is anxiety. No, I'm going to use the same framework and the same language that she's using around bad nerves, because that's her language. That's what she knows, and that's what she's talking about. And also, just understanding that it's healing. I don't say mental health, I say mental wellness, because it's a part of our holistic dimensions of wellness, right? Mental health has a particular stigma with it. If I'm going into Black and Brown communities, I'm not going to say and talk about mental health. I'm going to talk about wellness. I'm going to talk about our emotional experiences. I'm going to use language that is connecting versus dividing.
I just wanted to hold space for that, for all of you, for both of you, for all of you on this call. All of those answers have been phenomenal. There's one more in the question and answer. And Cheryl, if you have time, if you could type your answer to this person, that would be phenomenal. But we are actually coming to a close. And I wanted to make sure to, number one, say that anytime you open a container, you must close it. This is also a part of our understandings, our global understandings of collectivity, of equity, of liberation, is to create containers that are tight within camaraderie and appreciation with each other. And so I wanted to first thank our panelists, Hakim and Cheryl, for being here. Thank each of you in the audience for coming, and then give time to bring back our friend, our mentor, our elder, Sequoia, to close the space for us so that we have the opportunity to wrap things up in a way that feels right, and that gives us the opportunity to take on these lessons that we've learned from each other and to pass them on to each other. So thank you all, and I'll now hand it over to Sequoia.
Chen Quinman told me I'm grateful and thankful to all of you for the awesome discussion, the awesome questions, and for all the knowledge transfer, all the knowledge you carry, and your compassion and wanting to make change happens in a positive way for people moving forward. That's really important in this day and age. And being the voice for people who don't have a voice, that's the most important thing. Because a lot of times they feel like they don't have a voice. And it's those of us who can speak up for them or share their stories, we're their voice. And we can help make that changes that they need in their lives. So my hands are up to you. And I really enjoyed listening to all of you. For one thing, I really liked all your gentle voices. And I'm lucky I never went to sleep because it was calming. And I get, I'm a granny. My oldest granddaughter, my granddaughter, my late son's daughter is 20. Her brother, that's Kirsten, and her brother Jordan, my late son's son, is 17. And my daughter's son, who they live with me, is 16. So I'm a granny, and then my mom passed away last year, so I was a daughter, and I have one brother left. So, you know, I always say I get to have granny naps and I get to have granny moments when I forget. And so just keep up the good work. My hands are up to you. Keep up the good work. I'm going to do my namesake Sequoia and Sequoia, my ancestor, my grandpa and Grandpa Dominic and Uncle Louie's grand auntie. And she lived on the island known as Stanley Park in Vancouver. It's now connected to Vancouver through the man-made Lost Lagoon that covered one of the most best clam beds on both sides of the waterway, because they wanted to have a lagoon to walk around in the evenings. And so, and then they built the causeway to go into the park, a road. So she lived at Hue Hue, which is now called Lumberman's Arch. And it was a sheltered area in one of our ancient villages since time immemorial. And we call this song, the elders named it Sequoia Slolum Ha Squile. Sequoia song, greeting of the day. And you know, they fixed it. It was her song in our traditional longhouse, but they fixed it so that we can share it with people as a healing song. And, you know, we always need to be grateful. You know, greeting of the day, grateful that we woke up, grateful that we opened our eyes to greet the new day, grateful that we have each other, grateful that we have our families and our children and grandchildren, and for those of us who do, and grateful for what we do in our lives to help other people. And, you know, I'm grateful to all of you for asking me to share time with you. And so just open your hands, relax. As Tara said, become mindful and take a few breaths, open your hands. And while I sing, pray for your families, friends, communities, and each other, all of us gathered here. And then I'll do the prayer to close us off. And while I'm singing, just to brush you all off, that's what the intent of the song is, with all the good feelings and positiveness of each other's energy. So let the force be with you and we'll clear off each other with that energy. Oh, Chen Quinn Mintomi Kakakanak JCM Yonsionso Chinoyop and Manman Squalwin to Squals to Seats Yonsio Manman Equatal Chet Yop CI Chet Yop Squalwin. Asking you, Creator, to watch over and protect each and every one of your children gathered here today and all their families and their friends and their communities and villages, and help them with their squallowing, the feelings in their hearts and minds, their mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual health and well-being. Asking you, Creator, to watch over and protect and guide all of them with a shield around them as they go into the evening or into the days ahead, and asking you, Creator, to always guide them and help them with the work that they do to help other people, and to always make them know when they need to take care of themselves so that they can keep taking care of other people. Sometimes we forget about ourselves because we're always giving, and sometimes we need that few breaths just to calm and center ourselves, a cup of tea or coffee or a relaxing evening, and then we can go back to helping again the next day. So always help them to be aware of that. Asking you, Creator, to hear our prayers for all the families and friends of murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls as we honor and respect them on this day, and to lift up their spirits and help them to feel well in their squallowing. Asking you, Creator, to hear our prayers for all our family and friends who have serious illnesses, injuries, are waiting for surgery or have had surgery, those who may have tested positive for COVID, or those who have recovered and have long haul or impacts of COVID, or anxiety and depression. Prayers for all, here are prayers for all of them for their health, healing, and recovery. Asking you, Creator, to hear our prayers for all our family and friends who have traumas and battle drugs, whether legal or illegal drugs, and those who are homeless because of their traumas and battles. Asking that you protect them all and keep them safe, especially right now during this last 6 months of COVID. The supply on the street has become dangerous and taking many people 30 or under. So protect them all and help them find that healing path to wellness and recovery. Asking you, Creator, to hear our prayers for all our family and friends who have heavy feelings of sorrow for loss of loved ones. As they say farewell, let our prayers lift them up as they say farewell as their loved ones go home to the ancestors and Creator, and that they know that always their loved ones worry about them and send spiritual help when they're low in spirit, maybe a dragonfly, hummingbird, eagle, something that lifts you up in your spirits when you're low and brings a smile to your face is spiritual help from a loved one. So always know they're watching over us and our guardians. Again, Creator, take care of all your children gathered here and protect them and keep them safe. Tuma Quitsi Snachum, those are my words. And I say, Chen Quinn Mentomi, I'm grateful and thankful to have been a part of the day with you. And just as my late son, who I lost in 2018, always used to say when he'd go by on a bus, he'd go top left, love, peace. And he always said air hugs on social media, or if he saw you and couldn't give you a physical hug. So top left, love, peace, air hugs. Wachayap yo. You all take care.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. Take care.